A text does not come with its own interpretation. A person must find an interpretive key in order to understand a text. And you can understand this pretty easily. This is why courts exist and why we don't simply have law books to tell people what to do. And courts do more than settle disputes of fact, although that's certainly one of the major things that they do. They also have the ability to decide how to interpret a law. Does this case count as burglary or does it count as theft? And these courts have a very important role in helping to govern our society by making sure that there are real human beings implementing the laws. I think many of the council fathers thought that paragraph 23 of Sacrosanctum Concilium would be interpretive key for the reform of the whole liturgy. Sacrosanctum Concilium is the apostolic constitution that called for the reforms of the liturgy. It passed with overwhelming consensus by the council fathers in 1963. And I think the majority of the council fathers took great comfort in paragraph 23, which I will read in its entirety for you. That sound tradition may be retained, and yet the way remain open to legitimate progress. Careful investigation is always to be made into each part of the liturgy which is to be revised. This investigation should be theological, historical, and pastoral. Also, the general laws governing the structure and meaning of the liturgy must be studied in conjunction with the experience derived from recent liturgical reforms and from the indults conceded to various places. Finally, there must be no innovations unless the good of the church genuinely and certainly requires them. And care must be taken that any new forms adopted should in some way grow organically from the forms already existing. I think this one line that was in there must be no innovations unless just the good of the church genuinely and certainly requires them, is a high bar. It is a high bar for introducing anything that is new, that says that if you're going to try something new, you have to be absolutely certain that this is the correct thing to be doing. This is not something that should just be taken on lightly. We are not opening up the door to anybody trying to do whatever they want. You could imagine a trustworthy person who understands the liturgy would take this text and make a very conservative reform. They would really carefully study things, and unless something could reach the bar of genuinely and certainly required for the good of the church, it would not be brought in. A trustworthy person would make a very conservative reform. But the troubles with the interpretation can begin. So let's take a look at another paragraph that was, in fact, calling for change, paragraph 34. The rites should be distinguished by a noble simplicity. They should be short, clear, and unencumbered by useless repetitions. They should be within people's powers of comprehension and normally should not require too much explanation. Well, that all sounds like it's very nice. It should be something that's very clear if you don't think about it. But you can begin to think about just what this paragraph 34 would mean. Who gets to decide all of this? Who gets to make a judgment about all of this? Which of these rights are simple and which are not? What constitutes short and clear and what constitutes long and unclear? What constitutes a useless repetition? And how do we know if the people are comprehending this or not? I don't think it's enough just to ask them if they understand it. What basis do we have for measuring this comprehension? Now, I think that it is possible to imagine a man who takes this directive, along with the directive in paragraph 23, very seriously. He may, with great consideration and thought, make a few trims here and there. And if there's some sort of innovation that seems to be genuinely needed, he might be able to go through with that. But we would think that with paragraph 23 in their mind, that no change and no innovation is supposed to be done without the good of the church genuinely and certainly requiring it, that they would make a very conservative reform in the liturgy. And there have been times when the church had to go in and clean up some overgrown rites as time goes on. People kept on adding a little more things, little more things, little more things. And the church, the liturgy gets a little bit cluttered, cleaning things out. There are periods of codification and return to the traditions of the church where that was done, and it had a genuinely useful effect on the church. A serious and honest man could have pulled this off. So let's take a look then at the sort of man who actually did this. And who we have is Annibale Bugnini, Archbishop Annibale Bugnini. And he was in the liturgy office at the Vatican in the 1950s and the 1960s. And he certainly had his own opinions about how he was going to do things. And he had other people who had a similar project to them. So he saw this Second Vatican Council as an opportunity to get his ideas in there. But he knew that his ideas were a minority position and that most of the bishops who were gathered at the Second Vatican Council would not be interested in his ideas, that they were too radical, that they were too progressive, and they would only be shot down by the General Assembly. And so we have a quote from him. This comes from Yves Chiron's Annibale Bugnini, Reformer of the Liturgy. I'm not sure, I don't own this particular book, but it's been cited from multiple websites, and I've not seen anybody dispute the authenticity of this quote, which comes in 1961 when the council was still being planned. So this is his quote. It might have been from a letter or something. It would be most inconvenient for the articles of our Constitution to be rejected by the Central Commission or by the Council itself. That is why we must tread carefully and discreetly. Carefully so that proposals may be made in an acceptable manner, or, in my opinion, formulated in such a way that much is said without seeming to say anything. Let many things be said in embryo, and in this way let the door remain open to legitimate and possible post-conciliar deductions and applications. Let nothing be said that suggests excessive novelty and might invalidate all the rest, even what is straightforward and harmless. We must proceed discreetly. Not everything is to be asked or demanded from the council, but the essentials, the fundamental principles are. So, based on the texts that we've just heard there, that it seems like he was intending to hide his true intentions from the council and only ask for little things. And Bugnini already had an important place in the liturgy office of the church, and so he was able to make serious propositions to the council and confident that he would be tasked with implementing these things. He was also quite a mover and a shaker. He knew how to convince people, including the Pope, and he especially knew how to operate a committee to form a consensus. So when you look at the 1962 Roman Missal with its very thick rituals and a great many ritual gestures, you compare it to the new Mass and how relatively simple and it is. You could look at him and say he was the one who took paragraph 34 and implied it with such vigor. You get the sense he was just kind of bulldozing things. And he was able to get this paragraph 34 through the council because he was confident that he would be the interpreter. And as long as he was the one interpreting it, he would be the one who would be able to make these decisions. Moreover, we can actually find places where the Reform Missal and the way that Mass is celebrated in the vast majority of places in the church today actually fully contradicts what was the common opinion of the Council Fathers. So we can look at Sacrosanctum Concilium, paragraphs 36 and 54. That Latin is to be preserved in the Latin rites, while the vernacular may be admitted more widely, especially in readings and instructions. And we don't have to sit around and guess what the average council father thought that this was going to mean. The new liturgical movement has a series of blog posts where they go through interventions at the council itself. So council fathers getting up and saying what they think to the entire council. We've got reams and reams and reams of paper that record everything that was said. And also, they're speaking to the media while the council is going on, right there in 1962 and 63. And the overwhelming consensus was is that, well, there's going to be some new vernacular parts of the Mass, but the canon of the Mass, everybody was very clear. The canon of the Mass, or what's now called the Eucharistic prayer, that would always remain in Latin. That would never be said in the vernacular. And they've got just a huge amount of documentation that shows without any doubt that that was the explicit intention of everybody, basically, who voted for this document. It was the overwhelming consensus that, people had different opinions about which parts might be in vernacular, which parts might be in Latin, but that the canon was always be in Latin. It's very rare to find a parish that actually follows through on this intention, because by 1970, use of the vernacular for all of the canons of the church, because new Eucharistic prayers were composed in the late 1960s, was the norm everywhere. The men tasked with implementing the liturgy claimed the mantle of Vatican II while disregarding their clear wishes. So, where do we find this difference between intention and implementation? And how do we understand it? With a deliberative body like the Second Vatican Council, the making of a text is only part of the process. The implementation of what is written down falls on particular people. A text itself cannot govern, only a person can. If you want the intention of what you're writing down and the implementation to match, you need to pick the right people in order to carry out this task. I don't have an awful lot of time to make this video. I have some opinions about what we could do moving forward in the future, but that's too big a question for this video. Many people have noted the difference between the intention and the implementation, Sacrosanctum Concilium, and hopefully this short video can give you an idea of why I talk the way I talk and why I think the way I think, and why I can still claim the mantle of the Second Vatican Council, because I think much of its intention was good, or at least good enough. And it's mostly in the implementation of the Second Vatican Council that I take issue. So we'll just say our prayers, we'll do our duties before God, and may God bless you all.